In this first video on bioenergetics, enzymes, and metabolism, I will be discussing about certain principles in physics that will be of use to us when we investigate more later on this topic in biology. Now, just a review, we define energy as the ability or the capacity to do work, and there is a branch in physics called thermodynamics, which is the study of the changes in energy that accompany events in the universe. Meaning to say, in anything that actually happens, observe your surroundings, things that move, things that change. Those movements, those changes are actually accompanied by changes in the energy of the system. So there are certain laws under thermodynamics, and we are going to talk about two of them. First, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and it may only be transformed into one form and into another. So we can see in this illustration examples of that. The mechanical energy of the wind is turned into electrical energy using a machine such as the wind turbine. And then the food that you eat, which is in the form of chemical energy, is utilized by your body to eventually allow you to lift weights in the form of mechanical energy. And the bioluminescing ability of this anglerfish that we see here is actually at the expense of the food that it ate. So from chemical energy to light energy. So we cannot destroy energy, we cannot make it, but we can transform it. So that's quite a very profound thing to think about. Even though it's as simple as that, there are so many implications of that particular law. Then we have the concept of internal energy, or E. This is the energy in a system. And the energy in a system or internal energy may actually change. You can change it. So we have a symbol, delta E, to denote the change in internal energy. So for example, if we have an egg, and if we cook the raw egg, we are actually sort of putting energy into the egg molecules into the system, which is the egg. And in the process, we are increasing the internal energy of the egg. So that's the reason why it's very important to actually cook our food, because in that way we are adding energy into the food before we eat the food. Okay? So remember, we eat food for energy, so why not add energy to it first before you eat it? That's why we cook the food. So this process of changing the internal energy positively is called an endothermic reaction or change. So cooking is an endothermic change. Then here on the right, we have another example, a matchstick, which actually has a sort of combustible fuel at one tip made of phosphorus. Okay? When you actually strike it against the side of the box, and then it bursts into flame, and then you let it burn so that you now have the burnt matchstick here on the right, you're actually releasing the energy that was stored in that fuel. So by that, we have decreased the internal energy of the matchstick. So the burnt matchstick now has lesser internal energy than the original matchstick. So there is a negative change in internal energy, and this change or reaction is what we call as exothermic. And then we can transfer that particular idea to what's happening in living things. So here we have a plant. At daytime, when there's light, the plant actually performs photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide from the air into food in the form of glucose in the chloroplasts. Okay? So this is similar to us cooking the egg. Okay? From the raw egg, we cook it, we add more energy to it, and thereby increasing the internal energy. So here in the left, the internal energy of the glucose is greater than the internal energy of the carbon dioxide molecule. So there is a positive change in internal energy, as denoted by the inequality delta E is greater than 0. While at night, the same plant will use up the food that it made in the morning, the glucose, to fuel its metabolism, to do certain work that it needs to do, such as growing, for example. And it does this by, quote-unquote, burning the glucose so that it becomes carbon dioxide. So this happens in the mitochondria of the plant cell. And as what you can see, this is the opposite of the first process, photosynthesis. And therefore, the change in internal energy from glucose to carbon dioxide is a negative. So as you can see in the inequality here, this is delta internal energy, which is less than 0. So that's a negative. So we can therefore say that photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction and cellular respiration is an exothermic reaction. So this is the second law of thermodynamics. Events in the universe tend to proceed downhill from a state of higher energy to a state of lower energy. So the things that are happening around us, many of them are actually what we call as spontaneous, meaning to say we don't do anything for them to happen. They just happen. And spontaneous events are those events that are in a downhill proceeding. And they are thermodynamically favorable. Thus, you don't need to do anything for them to happen. They do not require the input of external energy. But as a result, they would cause the loss of useful energy. And when useful energy is lost, that is equated to an increase in the disorder of, say, the system. And I think you already have the word in mind when we talk about disorders in systems, and that's entropy, or S. So that's the measure of disorder. So again, if we look at the statement here in number 2, events in the universe tend to proceed downhill from a state of higher energy to a state of lower energy. It seems like it's telling us that there's a loss of energy. When in reality, there's really no loss of energy, it's just the loss of useful energy. Meaning to say, the energy becomes useless. The spent energy becomes useless. And this loss of useful energy is equated to the temperature in Kelvin, the absolute temperature, times the change in entropy. So here we have an illustration for that. We have a cube of sugar, sucrose, which is placed in a beaker full of water. You do nothing, you just put it there. But because the glucose dissolving in water is a spontaneous event, eventually after an hour or so, the block of glucose or sucrose will be dissolved in a uniform distribution throughout the water, as you can see here on the right. Okay? So this is called diffusion, the same way as when someone's spraying perfume on one end of the room and A person on the opposite end will eventually smell the perfume because the molecules have diffused. So the same story as that one. So this is a show of an increase in disorder. From the ordered molecules of the sucrose in the form of a block, it has now become spread throughout the liquid. So, what do you think will happen if we boil all the water away, let them evaporate, and we are left with a crystalline glucose or sucrose back at the bottom of the beaker? Can we say that we have decreased the disorder and that we have gone against the law of nature because the sugar has recrystallized? The answer is no. There is still an increase in disorder because at the expense of making order to the sugar molecules, you have actually caused more disorder to the molecules of the evaporated water. Take note, the water became a gas from being a liquid, and there's actually more water, if you can see in the illustration, than the sugar molecules. So at the expense of bringing order, you have caused disorder in your surroundings. And the same is true for living things. A cell, for example, always strives to have order in it. But as a reason, it actually releases heat as it tries to work and make order inside its cytoplasm. And the heat that it releases is actually passed to the molecules surrounding the cell and cause those molecules to become disordered themselves. So again, there is a law here that we can see that bringing order doesn't necessarily mean you are going against entropy. Bringing order into a small system will cause disorder actually at a greater extent in the surrounding system. So the internal energy of the universe is actually constant, but entropy is continually increasing. Okay, so put that in your mind. Entropy is continually increasing. In other words, the amount of energy that's available for us to do work is actually decreasing time by time. So the question now is this: if energy can be spent and becomes useless energy, is there a form of energy that actually cannot be used to do work? Take note, we define energy as the ability to do work. Is there such a form of energy that cannot do work?